Hello, my name is Billy Ray Huzzy, and I'm a potter and with Southernfoot Pottery Collectors Society. And today we'll take a few moments of your time and highlight one of our national treasures, an African American potter, poet from the 19th century, and he goes by the name of Dave Drake. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. And we have a couple of pieces here we're going to talk about today, which are featured in our ongoing auction as we speak today. And I just don't want to forget any notes I have written down here to tell you about this man. But at any rate, we do believe that Dave was born in America, in South Carolina primarily, where his life was stationary. He did not go anywhere from that point. He was born into the family of the Landrums, Dr. Abner Landrum, a physician, an entrepreneur of many professions, and his brother, Reverend John. And the Landrums operated a newspaper in Edgefield, South Carolina, during the early part of the 1800s. And they are solely responsible for, credited to, the introduction of the alkaline or ash glaze in the American South. So quite a landmark to get Dave started on his adventure in the pottery life, as well as he was a poet. And that's what we're going to discuss a little bit today. Dave learned to read and write, learned to read and write in the newspaper, in the family paper there. And by around 1830, he was sold into the Drake family, primarily Harvey, who was a potter, and his brother Reuben, and they purchased the Pottersville shop from the Landrums. And this is where Dave learned the potter's craft, and he perfected it to his national fame as both potter of massive pots and his poetry, which engulfed many realms from just everyday events, politics, humor, if you will, sadness, great insight, his Christian faith. Many things were exhumed out of his poetry. At any rate, Harvey died around 1832, and we don't know a lot about Dave's life during the 1830s. We know that he did keep potting because there's many examples that we can attribute to him from his glaze recipes, as well as his characteristics from his pots, his handles, his jar rims, jug necks, and so on and so forth. So we know he kept potting. Into the late 1830s, something happened today that was just changed his whole lifestyle. And of course, it makes him an iconic treasure today is his poetry that he was able to put onto the pots when they were wet. He put his verses, couplets, and insightful poetry verses into the pot while it was wet. And at this point, up until about 1841 or so, 42, he did some pots with poetry. His name was signed on there. And then from the about 1843 or so into about 1848 or so, that time period, no pots that we know of are known with his name or any poetry or couplets on them. And there's a lot of things that was going on at that time. One particular thing that happened in Dave's life was he lost his leg, one of his legs, from an accident, and he was blessed to come in contact with another person who had an impairment of the arms by the name of Henry Simpkins. So we think the two collaborated, that Henry might have kicked the wheel for Dave while Dave was potting the pieces on the wheel. And this is an interesting thing that changed his life as well. Maybe a mystery about the time when no pottery was being known that was signed or dated or couplets is that there was a slave riot in Augusta in 1840. There was a lot of political upheaval about the rights of the slaves, the future of the slaves, the well-being of the slaves, marriage arrangements, and so on and so forth of the slaves themselves, as rights were being conformed and organized for these new people that had come into America, the African Americans, as well as slavery itself was being challenged. But at any rate, as we move into the late 1840s, and this is what we want to talk about this piece right here just a moment, because this is a remarkable piece in that it's dated, and it has Mr. Miles and Dave, and this is his signature here, And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Here's some slashes that are attributed to his wear as well as some other slave potters of the era. And turn it right around and showing here that it's dated October 15th, 1849. And as I said, that decade of the 40s left a lot of voids in his potting for dating, because he dated a lot of pieces into 1850s and 1860s. We think he died somewhere close to 1870. Now, one interesting thing as we look at this signature here is that Dave's early signatures in the 1830s were very small, quaint, very well written, very delicately written, and they look nothing like this. And into the 1850s, 1860s, his writing became larger, maybe 2 or 3 times bigger than this, as well as more flamboyant, more stylish. He did a lot of dazzling ends on his lettering. But at any rate, the most important thing here is to think about the transaction. Somewhere in the 1840s, he changed hands again from the Landrum family into B.F. Landrum Sr.'s potting for 2 or 3 years. But ultimately here, Mr. Miles was Dave's owner, and here he respected Mr. Miles by saying Mr. Miles. And this was a short-lived endeavor right at the end of the 40s decade. And then after that, he began to put LM, and that's like this pot here that is written vertically instead of horizontally. And this is pretty unique. Here's the LM, which stands for Lewis Miles, which is customary for the 1850s, 1860 pieces. Dated December with a little extra at the end, 21st, 1859, and Dave again written. And this is a unique glaze from his earlier ones that are uniform consistencies, from oatmeals to creams to dark olives, even to dark browns. And this is a drippy glaze, and you can tell this is a very unique piece here in itself, because you don't see this kind of a glaze on Dave's work very seldom. So anyway, we know that Dave was a very intelligent person and a very perceptive person, and that's one of the reasons why he is highly sought today. And hopefully, if you have any interest in these pieces, they are in our auction that we're going through November the 5th, and we'd like to hear from you at 336-581-4246. And I thank you for your time and listening.